Hello, this is Magnus here. Today's episode is going to be specifically targeting a couple of more tests with the GH5. First, we're going to test in-body stabilization versus lens stabilization versus no stabilization using the Canon 5D Mark IV, the NX1, and the GH5. Next, we're going to test slow motion in several different settings and which ones perform the best. And then finally, a quick test of rolling shutter and which ones perform under optimal settings. Here we go.
Starting with the image stabilization test, I was a bit harsh on the cameras. Rather than trying to walk as steady as possible, I walked with the cameras to my chest and just walked casually as if I wasn't filming at all. All three cameras were going to produce shake, but which camera made the shake more usable? Here are all three cameras side by side. Can you tell which is which? Okay, first up, this shot is the Samsung NX1. It's got digital image stabilization turned on as well as OIS turned on, but from the footage, it's just a walking mess. Let me move on to the next camera before you guys get motion sickness. This next shot is of the Canon 5D Mark IV. The lens nor the body had image stabilization, and like I said, I walked as if I didn't have the camera on. And what can I say? It's just like I'm trying to dance while walking down the street, and nobody cares. And finally, here's the GH5. Still a bit shaky as you'd expect, but that's with me shaking the camera like crazy and not paying much attention. The swaying that you noticed was not the camera's fault, but that's legitimately how I walked with all the cameras, so I can't blame the swaying on the camera itself. All in all, the image stabilization on the GH5 performance is untouchable. Next, I did a test of slow motion at each camera's top resolution at 60 frames per second. First, we have the NX1 at 1080p, 60 frames per second set up with 800 ISO. The NX1 using the H.265 codec at this frame rate keeps an excellent amount of detail while the footage looks buttery smooth with minimal noise. Next up, we have the 5D Mark IV at 1080p, also with 800 ISO. The Mark IV did a great job of keeping the footage buttery smooth and was able to bring in more light. The quality looks just a bit better and more rich than the NX1. Though the NX1 was a tad sharper. Finally, we have the GH5 and its highest resolution at 60 frames per second, which was at 4K. The resolution and the quality of video is untouched, and that resolution itself of the GH5 does an amazing job of clarity, as well as producing a great looking image. Next test, we'll move on to the highest resolution of each camera at 120 frames per second. Starting again with the NX1, the ISO levels were turned up a bit more to 1600, and you can see a lot more artifacts in this footage than on the 60 FPS footage. In a well-lit situation, this camera still produces usable footage at 120 FPS, but I would recommend against shooting at this frame rate in any dark situation. However, the nice advantage of this camera is that it can record audio and autofocus at this accelerated frame rate, which makes capturing the right moment in slow motion a ton easier. Next, the 5D Mark IV's resolution drops to 720p when recording at 120 frames per second, which means a dip in quality. ISO turned up to 1600, and what you see is what you get. Footage looks great. However, with the reduced resolution and higher noise levels, it's a shame Canon didn't enable a higher resolution setting for their 120 FPS mode. The footage is nice looking, but the detail is lacking. This combined with no autofocus or sound. And finally, we have the GH5 at 120 FPS at 1080p. This footage just looks beautiful again. Well lit and minimal noise, although you can still see it a bit thanks to the higher ISO, and it's just crisp and sharp. Again, there's no autofocus or sound available, but the footage itself is very nice looking off of this camera. And because the other cameras can't touch it, I squeezed in a look at 180 FPS mode on the GH5. It was a bit darker, so I had a light turned on at this point and noise levels were much higher with ISO up to 3200. Grain was apparent, but the footage itself still looked pretty good. The artifacts were there, but not that much when compared to the NX1's 120 FPS, so it's really good performer under such high frame rates. Great job, GH5. And finally, let's move on to the rolling shutter test really quickly. A side-by-side comparison of the NX1 and the 5D Mark IV's rolling shutter show that both cameras suffer from what looks like pretty equal rolling shutter effects. Upon a closer inspection, I'd say that the NX1 just edges out the performance of the 5D Mark IV when it comes to rolling shutter, but the difference is negligible. Moving on to the GH5, and it wins again. It reduces the rolling shutter effect significantly when compared to the other cameras. Very nice.
So there you have it. Those are the tests and comparisons. Let me know what you think and what I presented in the comments down below. And of course, as always, you can make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus and I'm out.
I recently installed an update for the MetaBones Speed Booster that allowed it to work without an issue with the GH5. Just wanted to show you guys that it's working. Thank you.